Y le damos la bienvenida a la experta Alison Serra, quien tiene más de 15 años de experiencia en la industria de contenidos digitales. La doctora Serra es vicepresidente de Mercadeo, Comunicaciones y Relaciones Públicas de Alcatel-Lucent para la región Américas. Bienvenida y un aplauso, por favor, para ella. Gracias.
Good morning. Buenos dias. I'm so privileged to be here this morning, pero lo siento mucho, pero no hablo español. So I'm going to do my best to speak at a reasonable pace because I tend to get a bit excited talking about some of this content. You know, we stand today, and it's a very sad day in our industry. You can't help but look at the tribute of Steve Jobs and not take a pause and think about his contribution to this industry. But beyond the fascinating technology that Jobs made the core of Apple, I think what is perhaps equally, if not more impressive, is that Jobs figured out how to create new ecosystems. He figured out how to create new business models that previously did not exist in a sustainable way. He did it with the iPod. He did it again with the iPhone. And when you think about the iPhone, hundreds of thousands of apps now deployed on that one device, yet how many did Apple actually create? What they created was not a killer app. What they created was a platform that allowed developers across the world to be able to tap into the intelligence of one device and create hundreds of thousands of applications. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to invest significant dollars in underlying broadband networks. And what I submit to you is that we have a similar opportunity to unlock the potential of those networks in new and creative ways that allow developers, advertisers, and other stakeholders across the ecosystem to take advantage of brand new business models and value chains. And gone are the days, we talked about the analog to digital conversion, gone are the days of trying to find the next killer app as a lone ranger in the industry. The industry is simply moving far too fast for any one company to bet all of their marbles on the table to get that exactly right. And at Alcatel-Lucent, I have to tell you, I submit that I have the best job in the company, if not in the industry, because I get to look at how technology will continue to influence the way that we live our lives and work. And it is through that horizon and that lens that I come to you this morning to talk about significant shifts that are on the horizon that will fundamentally change the complexion of our industry in the next 3 to 5 years. So with that, let's pull up the slides if we could. Okay. So before we jump into the 5 key shifts, let's take a view first at the panorama around us. We heard a lot already this morning about some of the change. Let me just punctuate a few key stats for you that kind of exemplify what we're up against. Next, please. First number, please. 2012, we saw smartphone penetration in the first presentation, but it might interest you to know that 2012, which is next year, is the first year that Morgan Stanley estimates that global smartphone shipments will exceed those of PCs of all types. That would be netbooks, notebooks, and desktops. Now, why is that significant? Well, the reason that's significant is, per the earlier presentation, we're finally getting scale with smartphones globally. And in an emerging market such as this one, that means lower price points for the masses. In Brazil, some analysts project this could be the first year that Brazil sees its sub-US $100 smartphone enter the market as a result of the global scale. The next number up here is 500 million. Now, I've done this presentation in a variety of formats for a few months, and it wasn't all that long ago that 500 million was Facebook's population. Today, it's over 800 million and counting, and at its current trajectory, the population of Facebook will exceed the population of Earth in the next 10 years. Some predict that your refrigerator may someday be connected to Facebook. Who knows? Stranger things certainly have happened. But 500 million is an important statistic for another reason. 500 million are the number of people globally who wear an avatar at least 20 hours per week. Now, some of you may think of an avatar and think of a big blockbuster movie of giant blue people running around in a virtual world. What I'm here to submit to you is that many of you in this audience likely fit this profile, where you yourselves are an avatar at least 20 hours per week, operating in a virtual environment, oftentimes a gaming environment, but it is fundamentally changing the way that we engage with one another. 4%, if you could go back, please, 4%. That's an interesting statistic in the U.S. The U.S. has had a very robust paid television market for some time now. 80% of people have subscribed to some kind of paid television service. But this is the first year that we're starting to see people abandon paid television services for the first time. And the estimate is that by the end of this year, as many as 4% of consumers in the U.S. will be video cord cutters. These are individuals that are choosing to get their video from other sources, like Netflix, a new entrant here, but one we've had for some time in the U.S., like YouTube. I will give you this as YouTube's aspiration. YouTube, although the definite destination for some of the user-generated content we saw earlier, has an aspiration and actually is already providing professional content on its site. Now, YouTube has a pretty humble aspiration, and that is, according to YouTube, roughly, the average user of YouTube roughly watches 15 minutes a day. 15 minutes a day. The average American watches 5 hours of television a day. YouTube's aspiration is to move from 15 minutes a day to 5 hours a day using YouTube, not paid television services in the traditional mode, as the transport. $2 billion, the number at the top. This really is in homage to Apple. $2 billion is the amount of revenue that Apple generated the first quarter it released the iPad. First quarter. Now, that alone would be impressive on its own as a statistic. What is more impressive is when you consider that just 10 years earlier, the entire company, Apple, generated just $1.8 billion in revenue. 10 years, one device exceeds the entire revenue of the company just a decade earlier. And for many, the first time, we remember back in the 80s, those of us old enough to remember, the Mac wars versus the IBM wars, the Microsoft wars. And clearly, you could argue Apple had the better mousetrap, Microsoft had the better distribution, and that debate has been ended. To this day, Microsoft unequivocally owns the PC market. But what it shows is how one bet on the table can change everything. Back at the turn of this century, the two companies made very different bets on the table. Microsoft went after search. They attempted to acquire Yahoo, then they went and developed Bing. On the other hand, Jobs had the vision of going after mobile, created the iPhone, the iPad, and now for the first time in 14 years, Apple's revenues, not just its valuation, exceed Microsoft. But before you count Microsoft out, consider this. Guinness Book of World Records just released the fastest-selling device of all time this year, and it was not an Apple product. It was a Microsoft product. The product is the Xbox Kinect. Are you familiar with the Xbox Kinect? Offers 3D recognition of your movements without a controller, yeah? Microsoft sold 8 million Kinects in 60 days, about 130,000 per day. And Microsoft has taken a page from Apple in opening up the code of the Kinect to millions of developers worldwide to develop their applications to their heart's content. So I want you to envision, if we're talking about video at this conference as the key bandwidth hog that everybody's talking about, what might we be talking about in 3 years when you have full 3D capabilities that can be registered over those same networks? Some say it could be the era of 3D photography. Many certainly predict that there will come a time in the not-so-distant future where you will be able to sit in your living room and with the gesture of your hand seamlessly move content from device to device around your home. That remains to be seen, but stay tuned. And then finally, $1 billion, the figure in the center there. That is the U.S. market this year for mobile advertising. And if you look at the global market number, it's not that much better. It's about $2 to $3 billion. Now, I would submit those numbers are pretty paltry when you consider that many of you have a mobile device on your hip right now. That mobile device is the most personally connected device that you carry 24/7. And when you consider that worldwide, more people have access to mobile technology than they do running water. Yet $1 billion, if not $3 billion worldwide, is the mobile advertising market. I submit to you that mobile advertising has a long way to go, particularly when you consider in the U.S. alone, the television advertising market is a $55 billion market, yet we all know that eyeballs are moving away from television to other media. So with those kind of setting the stage of where we are, what are the 5 shifts that I think should be on our radar as to how technology can influence who we become? Next slide. The first shift I'm going to spend some time on here, the generational shift. Now, in the U.S., we've got the generation kind of clash happening as we look in the public discourse. But I'm going to talk about 2 generations today. Those generations are the baby boomers, who in the U.S. alone wield about $2 trillion in purchasing power. Those are folks typically born between 1946 to 1964. And I'm going to talk about their offspring, the millennials, typically those born around 1980 and onwards. And here's what's interesting. When we look at the boomers, there's something interesting happening. Sometimes the boomers are called Generation S for the sandwiched generation because they are literally being squeezed on both sides. On one side of the boomer, and some of you may identify with this, you have parents living longer, healthier lives thanks in no small part to advancements in medicine and technology. In 2006, caring for an elderly parent in the U.S. took about 21 hours per week, which had the economic impact of about $350 billion more than the U.S. spent on Medicare that year. That's on one side of you. On the other side of you, thanks to a soft economy, you have millennials boomeranging back home to live at home with their parents. 1 in 8 millennials over the age of 22 have boomeranged back home at some point in time. So boomers are in a really interesting predicament. Couple this with the healthcare debate that is certainly raging where I come from in the U.S., but wherever you stand on whatever politics of healthcare, consider some additional statistics on this. The U.S. is expected to face a labor shortage of nurses that will top 1 million in the next 10 years or so. At the same time, boomers in the next 10 years or so, or 20 years at the most, 6 in 10 of you will be facing multiple chronic diseases with diabetes affecting 1 in 4 of you. Not sobering, right? Just very sobering, I should say, as a landscape. So where does technology have a role to play? Well, there have been studies done that look at how we take healthcare and put healthcare back in the patient's hands such that the patient becomes a partner in his or her healthcare regimen. There was a study done of chronically high blood pressure patients. One group was told, monitor your blood pressure at home every day and basically record the reading every day in your diary. The other group was told, monitor your blood pressure every day using a special device that was connected to the cloud, that allowed a clinician to monitor those ratings daily. And in the case of an abnormality, that clinician was able to call the patient and ask, what did you eat today? What has your diet been? Let's make these tweaks. Within 6 months, 60% of those that were monitored with the clinician were able to reduce their blood pressure compared to 40% in the control group that didn't have that clinician activity. That doesn't take more labor, it doesn't take more expense, it takes technology useful in a way that allows patients to evolve their role with their practitioners. Now let me talk about millennials, because millennials are a very interesting topic. We've admired millennials for some decade now because they are the first digital natives. Millennials are unique in that literally in their formative years, they have grown up with the technology extended upon them. We heard about Club Penguin earlier. This is the life of the millennials that they've grown up. But what's interesting is we've admired them as consumers. What is interesting about millennials now is in the next 3 years, millennials will represent 1/3 of the workforce. So millennials are literally storming the gates. And unlike previous generations that are accustomed to taking technology habits acquired in the workplace and expecting those habits at home, typically you had broadband at work before you had it at home. You might have had a mobile phone at work before you expected one for personal use. Millennials go in the exact opposite direction. They expect to be able to take whatever technology, devices, and habits they've acquired at home and impose those requirements upon the workplace. So the paradigm facing CIOs and business managers in the next 3 years, when millennials represent critical mass of the workforce, is going to be staggering, and the effect of technology adoption on the enterprise can be seen as a parallel to what we've already seen in the consumer markets. Next slide, please. Second shift is the content shift. Now, I want you to consider that 10 years ago, the iPod was launched. It's amazing when you think about it. It was just 10 years ago. And think about how the music industry has been shaken to its core in just 1 decade. At first, the labels attempted to litigate against the technology. That didn't work too well in their favor. It took Apple coming along with a viable business model, and now virtual or digital media sales of music exceed physical media sales of music. The entire industry has been shaken. For those of you who know Justin Bieber, hopefully he's known worldwide, or you may have a daughter who's afflicted with Bieber fever, as it's known. The interesting thing about Justin Bieber, beyond him being an overnight YouTube sensation, is that it was he who had the negotiating power at the table against Usher and Justin Timberlake to pick who he would go with for the label. That is a complete paradigm shift to where we were just 10 years ago. So I submit to you, if that's one industry, and that's just music, what might be the implications as we look at content in a far more pervasive way? Consider that in the North America market, Netflix alone already accounts for 30% of the bandwidth consumed during peak periods. 30% by one application, Netflix. That's just in North America. Consider what could happen when your entire health record is now digitized. That's entertainment, it's important and interesting, but health is vital. Consider for the first time having your health record accessible from any device to any clinician. There's been evidence to support that only 1/4 of a nurse's time is actually spent administering patient care. The vast majority of the rest of her time is spent administering paperwork. And once you can move to an electronic health record, you dramatically increase the time a caregiver can dedicate to a patient, as well as reduce the technical accuracies. That's healthcare. Imagine education. We heard earlier, how can our kids be expected to learn the same way we did when they have new tools available to them? Many schools in the U.S. have already made the migration and have gone completely to an ebook format. Many K through 20 schools are now starting to pop up in cyberspace. This is a major content shift. Next slide, please. And all that content leads us to a cloud shift. Now, I submit that cloud is probably one of the most overhyped terms in our industry right now. It is the hype bubble of cloud. But what cloud does that makes it very unique and very interesting is that it changes the economic dynamics. So it's obvious from a consumer perspective, getting my content anywhere, anytime, on any device. We understand that piece of cloud, I'm sure. But consider it from an enterprise's perspective. Many enterprises are seasonal in their work. And in the olden days, you used to have to buy computers, buy devices, buy servers, and upkeep all of that expensive equipment and suffer obsolescence risk if that equipment were to fail you, or risk if anything else happened to the equipment. What the cloud allows you to do as a business is change the paradigm. Remember, I told you those millennials are used to coming from home to work. So they're going to come into the workplace with their iPads, their iPhones, their Android devices, and anything else that's attached to them, and they're going to expect it to work. They're not going to expect to be given something as a device and say, this is your device, you must stick with it, and only that device you shall use. So CIOs have an interesting paradigm here that they're looking through. What some CIOs are using is the cloud to solve two problems here. One is, instead of issuing company devices, they're instead issuing an allowance to the employee. Here's an allowance of $1,000, $2,000. You go bring in whatever device you want, and I will provide you the network functionality of compute resources, storage resources, network resources on demand, virtually. And then when I no longer need that workforce because my seasonality goes down, I at the same time disable all of those on-demand resources instead of having a bloated fixed cost infrastructure of capital that is useless to me. It changes the economics, allowing IT to be economized in a much different, more creative way. And that is where the cloud becomes really topical in today's day and age. But the more and more we put out there about ourselves to the cloud, next one please, the more likely we are to see this identity shift, because more and more of who I am is actually exposed based on the devices that I consume every day, whether that's the channels I watch at home, whether that's the sites that I surf, whether that's the places I go that my mobile phone knows where I am, or the calls that I make, or the buddies I interact with. All of that becomes very priceless information to me that exists in the network and begins to paint a constellation of me as a human being. Now, this is a pretty big debate in the U.S. because immediately people go to privacy and they think of how this information could be used for harmful purposes. But I submit there are very useful ways that allow us to use this information in a much more serendipitous way that augments and enhances our quality of life. Let me give you one example. There is a mobile application developed by a healthcare provider that basically has you log into a profile and register what your health profile looks like. Are you diabetic? Do you have high blood pressure? Are you obese? What does your profile look like based on your treatment with your doctor? That's loaded onto your mobile phone. Now, when you're going out to a restaurant with your friends, that mobile phone knows the restaurant you're about to enter because it knows your location. And before you can be seduced by the very appetizing treats on the menu, your mobile device can push to you automatically, these are the menu options that fit your health profile and are within the boundaries that have been set by you and your practitioner. That changes lifestyles, it changes health habits, but it also requires you to opt in and share more about yourself in order to get those additional benefits. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a day and age now where Google and Twitter can predict a flu epidemic 2 weeks before the Center for Disease Control can. 2 weeks prior to the CDC naming an epidemic, Google and Twitter have already identified it. How? because they are mining the data of search engine requests of flu symptoms. They're mining the tweets of people saying, I'm now at the doctor's office, I don't feel well. And they're aggregating all of that data in a big way to say, guess what? We have a flu epidemic. And guess what? 2 weeks later, what does the CDC say? We have a flu epidemic. That's a representation of our aggregate identity that's being collected through the networks that we consume every day. And finally, next slide, please, that leads us to a fundamental shift in our community. 6-7 years ago, Facebook did not exist. 800 million people now on Facebook. So I ask you, without trying to be so bold as to define who is the next Facebook, what I like to ask myself is, how might we engage differently if social media is the way we engage today in a major way? What might be the ways we engage in the next 3 to 5 years? What's fascinating is that there's work being done by pioneers at Stanford that look at this equation. Remember I gave you that stat, that 500 million people worldwide wear avatars at least 20 hours a week. Stanford is doing research on the use of avatars and how that changes the way we engage with each other the minute I can change my virtual representation of how I appear. I'll give you one example. They split students up into 2 groups. Both groups saw the same message delivered by the same avatar. That avatar told those students, you must wear your campus ID at all times for security purposes. Both saw the same message with one key difference. One group saw that avatar in a different way, in that any time that student moved his or her head ever so slightly to the right or to the left, that avatar was programmed to respond in kind exactly 4 seconds later. It's what we've been taught in psychology. It's been proven. In the real world, mimicry, as it's called, is one of our most powerful psychological influencers. If you want to get the job, you mimic the behavior of the person across the table. If you want to close the sale, mimic the prospect. The problem as human beings is that we're pretty bad at it. We come across false, disingenuous, contrived when we try to mimic. It's very obvious. But the best mimickers do it just automatically. These avatars can mimic automatically. And as such, people that saw that avatar were likely to say that avatar was more trustworthy and they're more persuasive in persuading them to take action. Now, I want you to envision a day when politicians can enter your living room and oh so subtly as an avatar mimic your movements to the point that could actually sway your vote and your decision of likability of which politician you like more or less. Pretty interesting when you think about it. Now, for those of you who think that's a scary world that we could be entering, let me submit to you the goodness of some of this. The other thing Stanford has found is that in education or in presentation, the most powerful weapon I have to engage you is eye contact. And they have shown that eye gaze actually increases your retention of the material I'm giving you. The problem is that as a presenter, it is impossible for me to maintain 100% eye gaze with 100% of you 100% of the time. But my avatar can. And they've done studies with students that look at an avatar as an instructor where the student actually retains more information because they believe that avatar is speaking directly to them. Now, those of you who are quick to dismiss this and say, Allison, we don't have headgear on our heads that monitor our movements, so this sounds too far out there. I will remind you, what was the fastest selling device on record? The Kinect. How many of you might have a Wii in your home? These devices are proliferating households as we speak. It is similar technology that allows you to tap into those capabilities, mimic, mirror, and be able to develop this new community whereby we're engaging with each other in a 3-dimensional way. Okay, so what I'd like to invite you to do, next slide, please. We have looked at this extensively at Alcatel-Lucent. You know, I can't pay enough tribute to Steve Jobs as a visionary. And as I said, he not only talked about technology, he unlocked new business models. the network has valuable assets that we are going to be investing in, whether that's knowing where I am, what my presence is, am I on a 2G, a 3G, a soon-to-be 4G network, what's my profile, who is around me. The network knows a lot about me. And if we can make those capabilities open in a managed and controlled way to developers and advertisers and others who would like to get access to those capabilities, we can create new value chains similar to the way the iPhone was able to revolutionize the mobile device industry. And we've quantified this. You don't have to take my word for it. In fact, I encourage you not to. We went to some 11,000 stakeholders across the ecosystem, end users, developers, advertisers, North America, South America, to quantify, is there an appetite for network intelligence, and could we actually create new business models as a result? And we quantified a $100 billion market opportunity, incremental, in the U.S. alone, when networks are leveraged as development platforms. You can pick up the book, no price, at theshiftonline.com, and read through the pages that give you the perspective from each of these stakeholder groups of what's critical to them, what's important to them, and where, most importantly, they see the network as important in augmenting the way they conduct business or live their lives. So I encourage you to go out to theshiftonline.com, get a complimentary copy. It is available in Espanol as well, so feel free to download that. And at this point, I'd like to open it up to any questions or comments from the audience. Okay, well, I want to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure being here. This is a momentous event. I want to congratulate this country for doing the important strides in making broadband accessible and available, and making the investments in broadband as an underlying technology that has been shown to be correlated to GDP growth. I cannot compliment you enough, and I look forward to big things here, and I look forward to engaging with you after the conference. Thank you so much.
Agradecemos a la doctora Alison Serra, por supuesto, por su excelente presentación.